Good evening. Welcome to This Week in Turkey. A court ordered the release of the American pastor Andrew Brunson from house arrest in the city of Izmir today.
At the heart of a diplomatic crisis between Turkey and the US, American pastor Andrew Brunson appeared in a court in the western province of Izmir today. The court passed a 3 years and 1.5 month sentence on Brunson, who had been charged with terrorism offenses, but said he would not serve any further time because he had already been detained since October 2016. The preacher was detained following the failed coup attempt of July 2016, but was released on house arrest this year due to health reasons. Witnesses said Brunson wept as the decision was announced. Before the judge's ruling, the pastor told the court, "I am an innocent man. I love Jesus. I love Turkey." US President Donald Trump, who had imposed sanctions on Turkey in an attempt to secure Brunson's release, tweeted, "Pastor Brunson just released. We'll be home soon." Reuters reported that a lawyer for the Brunson family said that Brunson was already on a plane to the United States shortly after being released by Turkish court. Brunson was detained for a total of 24 months, charged with terrorism for alleged links to the Fethullah Gülen movement and attempts to convert Kurds to Christianity to sow discord in the country, according to his indictment. Turkey blames Fethullah Gülen, an Islamic cleric that lives in the US on a self-imposed exile, for masterminding the failed coup attempt of 2016. Brunson had been under house arrest since July. The pastor's detention has adversely affected US-Turkey relations, triggering sanctions and tariffs by Washington against Ankara. US President Donald Trump, who has called for the pastor's release, had said that a great patriot was being held hostage. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan had said earlier that his government could not interfere in a judicial case. But US officials said on Thursday that an agreement between the two sides to free Brunson was negotiated on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly last month. The deal, they said, would include the lifting of US sanctions in exchange for reduced charges that would allow Brunson to either be sentenced for time served or serve any remaining sentence in the United States. Turkish prosecutors had sought a 35-year sentence for Brunson, who they accused of spying and supporting terrorists under the cover of humanitarian aid and interfaith dialogue. That request was later reduced to 10 years at the trial. Prosecutors also alleged that he supported members of the PKK, which had waged a decades-long insurgency against Turkey.
Joining us tonight is Gönül Tol, who is the director of the Middle East Institute's Center for Turkish Studies, and we'll be talking about today's court ruling on the American pastor Andrew Brunson, followed by the disappearance of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Good evening, Mrs. Tol. Welcome to This Week in Turkey.
Good evening. Thanks for having me.
So how was today's court ruling received in Washington today? What are the first reactions?
Well, of course, this was welcome news and somewhat expected. There were reports just before the hearing by American media outlets that there was a deal cut between the two parties. So it was somewhat expected, but and in regards to the reactions, the first reactions from the White House, President Trump tweeted 3 times. Vice President Mike Pence also congratulated the State Department and President Trump on his leadership. Turkey watchers mostly focused on how this trial revealed the sorry state of rule of law and Turkish judiciary. This was never considered a legitimate judicial process in Washington, D.C., but I think the manner in which this last hearing was handled once again proved that this was a sham trial. At the last minute, for instance, the secret witnesses, they retracted their testimonies against Andrew Brunson. And he was released, but he was convicted of aiding a terrorist organization. And yet he was released while thousands face long-term prison sentences on similar charges. So mostly I would say that it was welcome, but still met with skepticism, especially among those who are following Turkey in the think tank world.
And will Brunson's release lead to a new era in U.S.-Turkish relations, in your opinion?
No, because there are, as you know, there are many outstanding issues on the agenda. Turkey's decision to purchase Russian S-400 defense system is particularly troubling for the American lawmakers on the Hill, and there are sanctions on the pipeline. And you have the upcoming Iran energy sanctions that are coming up in November. And as far as I can see, the Trump administration seems intent on leaving little room to maneuver for its allies. In terms of, it might not be, of course, what the Turkish side wants is more flexibility on the sanctions, and yet I doubt that's what the Trump administration has in mind, given their policy of curbing Iranian influence in the region. And of course, there is the issue of U.S. cooperation with the Syrian Kurdish militia, the YPG. Despite the steps that have been taken in Manbij in particular, I think there is still a mismatch in expectations between the two parties. Turkey still expects to be in Manbij, and I think the American side has not committed to that. So there are still complications, but of course, this is welcome news in the sense that this will clear the air between President Donald Trump and President Recep Tayyip Erdogan ahead of midterm elections in November, and they are very critical for President Trump. So I think this could lead to a more constructive environment for the negotiations that are going on other outstanding issues.
Let's continue with the other important headline from today, which is the disappearance of the Saudi journalist Gnl Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul last week. So what sort of reactions did this disappearance of this prominent Saudi journalist generate in the US? What is the general sentiment right now towards this incident, both by the government and in the media?
Well, of course, the media, human rights organizations, and progressive institutions, they are absolutely outraged. And many lawmakers, especially from the Democrats, they are also very troubled. They are urging President Trump to look into it and demand an explanation. And just recently, 22 senators, they wrote a letter to President Trump demanding an explanation and also threatening sanctions against the perpetrators of this heinous crime. And the Senate also, I have to note that it's very important that the letter was signed by all members except one of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So that was a significant step, although it might not yield the results that they wanted to, but still I think it's a significant step. But of course, if you look at the reactions from the White House and the U.S. administration, President Trump is downplaying the allegations. I mean, he recently said that the incident happened in Turkey and Gnl Khashoggi was not even a U.S. citizen. And he also talked about something that is very critical to understanding U.S.-Saudi ties. He said that the Saudis were buying billions of dollars worth of American weapons, and calls to block the sale of American weapons to the Saudis would really hurt American workers and American economy. So I think that is something that he's not willing to do. But of course, I mean, it's difficult for this administration to take a drastic step to break ties with the Saudis, because it's this administration that built its entire Middle East strategy on two pillars, Israel and Saudi Arabia. So their number one priority in the region is curbing the clout of Iran. And of course, in their minds, Saudis play a critical role in achieving that goal. And also, as I said, Iran sanctions are coming up in November. And when those sanctions take effect, oil prices will go up. And to compensate, and of course, when you withdraw Iranian oil production, there will be a gap So to compensate that, I think Americans are counting on the Saudis and Saudis' Gulf allies. And also Americans have been putting pressure on the Saudis to bring down the oil prices. So if you look at their regional strategy for on all those issues, Americans really rely on the Saudis. So it's a very difficult relationship to break. It's completely transactional, I have to say, meaning that it's not based on mutual values, but it's based on common interests. And if September 11th, and if you remember, 15 of those 19 hijackers were of Saudi origin, and even if that didn't really shake relations, I doubt that the killing of a journalist, no matter how brutal it was, I don't think it's going to reshape the relationship. So I think Trump administration will do everything to sweep this under the rug. And I think the Saudi leadership, the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has been trying to leverage his relationship with President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, and that was the reason why he, after the incident and after several calls on the Saudis to address this, he decided to call Jared Kushner. But if, of course, Turkey decides to disclose the evidence that it says it has, this will put the Trump administration in a difficult spot. So I think if Turkey comes up with the hard proof evidence, I think a more likely scenario would be in where the American administration might freeze arms sales. But I think at the end of the day that won't be a long-term arrangement. And I think another thing to watch is how Western investors see things, because Mohammed bin Salman really needs investors for his reform agenda, and Saudis are gathering an investment conference next week. Media giants such as CNN, the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg, they have withdrawn their ads from the conference, and I've been hearing that also other Western investors, they are pulling out of the conference. So I think that dynamic is a very important one. It's important to watch what other investors, how they will see this and how they will act. And if it shakes somewhat, if it affects, if it has negative repercussions for the Saudi economy, I think that might eventually pose a challenge for the Crown Prince. He already has won many enemies within the royal circle, so I think this might strengthen the resentment against him within the royal family.
So as you've also mentioned in your previous responses repeatedly, actually, there have been calls from some Republican senators, such as Rand Paul, to stop arms sales to Saudi Arabia following the disappearance of Jamal Khashoggi. But Trump seems to be wary of these calls, as he has openly rejected them. So is this issue likely to result in a new and perhaps important rift within the Republican Party?
Well, we've recently seen that partisan motivations are stronger than ever, and we've seen that on the appointment of Judge Kavanaugh. Despite serious accusations against him, the Republican Party acted in a very partisan way. But I also have to note that there was a voting in the U.S. Congress in the summer. Some policymakers, they've been extremely worried, concerned about what the Saudis are doing in Yemen, and especially the human rights abuses, the killing of children, and they have questioned the U.S. support for the war. And it was a close vote. It was only 4 votes short of majority. And people from the Republican Party, key people like Lindsey Graham, for instance, I think after the Khashoggi incident, I've seen that he could shift his position. He has been a strong supporter of what the U.S. is doing in terms of countering the Iranian influence with the Saudi help. But this Khashoggi incident, if proven, could shift some of the opinions of some of the lawmakers within the Republican Party. But I don't think it will lead to a major realignment within the party.
Mm-hmm. And finally, how do you think this incident, the disappearance of Gnl Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, may have an impact on the reputation of Turkey in the West?
Well, of course, it depends on how Turkey will decide to handle it. Now, President Erdogan has options. He could either decide to disclose the evidence, and in that case, I think that could help Turkey's already shattered image a bit, because Turkey is one of the top jailers of journalists in the world, and the fact that Turkey is going out of its way to help with shedding light on the killing of a journalist might help Turkey's reputation a bit, but you have to consider this. It's Turkey does not have that much credibility in Washington anyway, so it's still going to be a difficult situation for Turkey. But of course, I think I'm already hearing some people applaud what Turkey has been doing. Turkish officials are leaking information to Western media, basically arguing that we have the audio and the video footage of the incident. So people feel that Turkey is doing the right thing. But even if Erdogan decides to disclose the evidence, I don't think it will not completely change how Turkey is viewed in Washington. But that would certainly be a right step in the right direction.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Tol, for being with us tonight and for your comments.
Thank you so much for having me.
Tonight we were joined by Gönül Tol, who commented on the release of the American pastor Andrew Brunson and the recent disappearance of the Saudi journalist Gnl Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. And we'll continue with our next news video. Turkey has accepted a proposal from Saudi Arabia to form a joint working group to investigate the case of missing journalist Gnl Khashoggi.
Turkey has accepted a proposal from Saudi Arabia to form a joint working group to investigate the case of missing journalist Gnl Khashoggi, within the framework of a close cooperation between Turkey and the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and upon the suggestion of the Kingdom, a joint working team between Turkey and Saudi Arabia will be formed to investigate the case of Gnl in all its aspects, Turkish presidential spokesman İbrahim Kalın told Anadolu Agency on Thursday. Khashoggi has been missing since October 2nd, when he visited the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. His fiancée, who was waiting outside, did not see him emerge from the building. A security delegation consisting of Saudi investigators arrived in Istanbul on Saturday to participate in the investigations. Saudi Arabia has strongly dismissed reports based on unnamed sources that Khashoggi was killed within the consulate. Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, Prince Khaled bin Salman, issued a statement this week addressing the malicious leaks and grim rumors surrounding Khashoggi's disappearance. In an article in The Atlantic, U.S. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul said that he planned to introduce legislation to scrap all funding, training, advising, and other coordination with the kingdom until they received confirmation that the journalist is alive. U.S. President Donald Trump has said U.S. investigators are looking into how Gnl Khashoggi vanished at the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, but made clear that whatever the outcome, the U.S. would not forego lucrative arms deals with Riyadh. Trump had said earlier that the U.S. is demanding answers from Saudi Arabia about Khashoggi and that he wants to bring his fiancée to the White House. Khashoggi's fiancée, Hatice Cengiz, has asked the U.S. President and First Lady Melania Trump to help shed light on Khashoggi's disappearance. In a column published Wednesday by the Washington Post, she wrote, "I also urge Saudi Arabia, especially King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, to show the same level of sensitivity and release CCTV footage from the consulate." Meanwhile, speaking to reporters as he returned from a visit to Hungary, President Erdogan expressed disbelief at Saudi claims that Khashoggi disappeared without being picked up by security cameras after leaving the consulate. How is it possible for a consulate, an embassy, not to have security camera systems? Is it possible for the Saudi Arabian consulate where the incident occurred not to have camera systems? He said. If a mosquito appeared, these systems would catch them. And I believe they would have the most advanced of systems, he said. Turkish investigators have heard testimony from a source who was inside the Saudi consulate at the time of Khashoggi's disappearance, who claims to have heard sounds of a struggle, according to Al Jazeera's Jamal El-Shayal, reporting from Istanbul. Reports in the Turkish media claimed that Saudi Arabia cancelled an offer to allow Turkish authorities onto the premises after Turkish state-owned media published a list of 15-member Saudi assassination squad who allegedly arrived in Istanbul on the same day Khashoggi disappeared. All 15 men had reportedly booked 4 nights in hotels near the Saudi consulate, but left Turkey less than 24 hours after arriving. A private Turkish TV channel with close links to Erdogan has aired the surveillance video of Khashoggi walking into the Saudi consulate and the black van leaving later for the consul's home. A critic of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, Khashoggi is a prominent commentator familiar to a generation of Middle East correspondents seeking insights into the intrigues of Riyadh. In recent years, he had turned into a critic of the kingdom's leadership and relocated to Washington in a kind of self-imposed exile. Khashoggi regularly wrote for the Washington Post, criticizing Saudi policies towards Qatar and Canada, the war in Yemen, and the crackdown on dissent and the media in the kingdom.
Finance Minister Berat Albayrak has urged all shops and businesses to give consumers discounts to keep the soaring inflation in check.
Finance Minister Berat Albayrak has set out a new approach to tackle the country's soaring inflation, urging all shops and businesses to give consumers discounts to keep prices in check. Albayrak called on companies to agree to a 10% price cut on products until the end of the year as part of an all-out fight against inflation that hit almost 25% in September. He said the campaign would be voluntary, but urged shoppers to show preference for businesses that took part, which could show their support by putting stickers with a special logo in the window. Albayrak hit out at companies that has engaged in speculation, opportunism, and stockpiling, added that Turkish authorities would monitor shops and businesses for such behavior and encourage citizens to call a special hotline to report unusual price hikes. Speaking at an event to announce his program to fight inflation, Albayrak said, "The fight against inflation and for price stability is not a fight that can be conducted by the state and institutions alone. The lira has fallen some 40% this year, driving up the price of everything from food to fuel and sending inflation to 25% last month, its highest in 15 years.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has ordered his ministers to stop receiving consulting services from U.S. firm McKinsey after a recent deal between McKinsey and the Turkish government came under fire from the opposition.
President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has ordered his ministers to stop receiving consulting services from US firm McKinsey after a recent deal between McKinsey and the Turkish government came under fire from the opposition. Last month, Finance Minister Berat Albayrak, who is also Erdogan's son-in-law, said Turkey had to decide to work with McKinsey to help implement a new midterm economic program. Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu, the leader of the Republican People's Party, CHP, accused Erdogan this week of siding with US firms at a time when relations with Washington have been hit by the detention of an American pastor in Turkey and other issues. Kılıçdaroğlu is trying to corner us by asking questions about a consultancy firm that has been paid in full to help our economic management, Erdogan told members of his ruling Justice and Development Party, AKP, on Saturday. In order not to give him that chance, I told all my ministers to no longer receive consultancy from McKinsey, he said. Reuters reported that McKinsey was not immediately available for comment. Andrew Brunson, a missionary working in Turkey for more than 20 years, was arrested in December 2016, accused of backing the coup attempt that July against Erdogan. The US has imposed tariffs on imports of Turkish steel and aluminum over Ankara's refusal to release the pastor.
Syrian rebels finished withdrawing all heavy weapons from the front lines in the northwestern province of Idlib on Monday.
Syrian rebels finished withdrawing all their heavy weapons from the front lines in the northwestern province of Idlib on Monday, the state-run Anadolu agency said, quoting unnamed opposition figures and Turkish officials. The Anadolu agency did not provide further details on the move, which came as part of a deal reached between Russia and Turkey to demilitarize the front lines between Syrian government forces and the opposition in and around the province. Idlib is the last major rebel stronghold in Syria. Naji al-Mustafa, spokesman for the National Front for Liberation, a Turkish-backed umbrella group, said on Sunday the alliance had unanimously agreed to implement the deal reached last month and expected to demilitarize 15 to 20 kilometers along the front lines by October 15th. Al-Mustafa said opposition forces would keep forward bases and light and medium weapons in place. Meanwhile, the UK-based Syrian Observatory for Human Rights reported Monday that nearly all heavy weapons have been removed from the area on the southern edge of Idlib.
Referring to the upcoming 2019 local elections, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan stated that in case those who have gotten involved in terror are elected, trustees will be immediately appointed to concerned municipalities.
In a speech in Ankara last weekend, President Recep Tayyip Erdogan referred to the local elections that will be held in March 2019 and stated that in case the ones who have gotten involved in terror are elected, trustees will be immediately appointed to those municipalities. The main opposition Republican People's Party, CHP, and People's Democratic Party, HDP, criticized President Erdogan for his remarks and suggested it was blackmail to voters and harms confidence in democracy. CHP Deputy Group Chair Gönül Tol noted that anyone who has a criminal record cannot be a candidate for local elections. But if one threatens to assign a trustee, even for the elected, then the country is ruled without democracy. It is a civil coup d'etat to the local elections, he added. HDP Deputy Group Chair Ayhan Bilgen said that the legality of a party that has received 6 million votes cannot be decided by another party. He recalled that there are states where elections have no function at all and have no respect in the international world, adding that the president's remarks are a declaration that the High Election Board and Constitutional Court have no meaning. What does it mean to have terror links? The HDP Deputy Group Chair said, adding that it was an ambiguous expression aiming at creating fear and blocking voters from realizing their will, and that this attitude is unfair to Turkey.
Now let's take a look at what's on in Istanbul next week.
Chloe's Endless Revisions show and Eclair Fifi will be at the Zorlu Center PSM tomorrow. Chloe, the DJ and French techno producer, takes a whole generation on her playing field of electronic music, far from being limited to techno. Endless Revisions once again marks her image as a musician who thwarts established classifications by deepening the sometimes too linear perspectives of current music. Soundport's Music and Art Festival returns to Istanbul. The two-day festival will be held in Bomontiada until Sunday. With its Empower One Another theme, Soundports offers interdisciplinary content in different styles. Gili and Deniz Tekin will take the stage on the first day of the festival, and the second day will host Chinese Man featuring Youth Star and Taiwan MC. Film Ekimi Festival continues this weekend. The festival offers a program of international and local film screenings, including the most anticipated films of the coming season and titles screened in latest festivals.
That's all from This Week in Turkey. Thanks for tuning in and hope to see you again next Friday at 5 p.m. Goodbye.